Imagine a world where everything you've ever known is suddenly forbidden. The prayers you whisper, the gods you honor, even the name of your capital city, all of it, erased by one man. This was Egypt in the 14th century BCE, under the rule of a pharaoh named Akhenaten. He wasn't just a king. He was a revolutionary, a heretic. Akhenaten declared that there was only one god, Aten, the physical disk of the sun. He shut down the ancient temples dedicated to gods like Amun, Osiris, and Isis deities worshipped for over 1,000 years. The powerful priests who served these gods were stripped of their wealth and influence. He even moved the entire capital from the grand city of Thebes to a brand new, custom-built city in the desert called Akhenaten, meaning horizon of the Aten. For 17 years, Egypt lived under this new, singular faith, but it was a faith born of command, not conviction. The people, the nobles, and the disenfranchised priests simmered with resentment, whispering the old gods' names in secret. They believed the gods had abandoned them. The crops failed, plagues swept the land, and the empire's borders weakened. They were waiting for a sign, for a return to the old ways. And then Akhenaten died. Into this chaotic world stepped a child, a boy only 9 years old. His name was Tutankhamun, the living image of Aten. This boy was now the pharaoh, the divine ruler of a fractured kingdom, a 9-year-old pharaoh. It's almost impossible to comprehend. How could a child possibly shoulder the weight of an entire empire, especially one teetering on the brink of collapse? The simple answer is, he didn't. Tutankhamun was a king in name. But the real power was held by a council of seasoned, ambitious men who had survived his father's reign. Chief among them were a high-ranking general named Horemheb and a shrewd elderly court official named Ai. These men were pragmatists. They saw the writing on the wall. The Aten experiment had failed. The military was restless, the people were suffering, and the traditional religious establishment was ready to reclaim its power. They saw the boy king not as a leader, but as a vasilla symbol through which they could enact a massive, sweeping counter-revolution. They would have approached the young Tutankhamun not with threats, but with grave counsel. They would have explained that the gods were angry, that the land was sick because the divine order, the concept of Marat, had been broken. The people are starving. They might have said, our enemies are laughing at us. The blessings of Amun have been withdrawn. For the sake of Egypt, we must bring him back. For a young boy raised in the isolated bubble of Akhenaten, this must have been a powerful, perhaps even terrifying, proposition. He agreed. It was the most important decision of his life, and he likely didn't even make it himself. The first, most symbolic act of this great restoration was a change of name. The boy king was no longer Tutankhamun, the living image of Aten. He became Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. This wasn't just a cosmetic change. It was a public declaration to the entire world. The heretic king was gone, and the son was undoing his father's legacy. His wife Akhenaten also changed her name to Akhenaten. The next step was physical. The entire royal court abandoned Akhenaten's ghost city in the desert. They packed up their lives and made the journey back to the traditional capitals of Memphis and, more importantly, Thebes. Thebes was the religious heart of Egypt, the home of the great Karnak temple, the seat of Amun's power. Imagine the scene, the royal procession returning to the city his father had forsaken. It would have been a moment of immense public celebration. The old temples, which had gathered dust for nearly 2 decades, were reopened. Their vast estates and treasuries, confiscated by Akhenaten, were returned to the priests of Amun, who were instantly restored to their former glory and wealth. Statues were repaired, rituals were resumed, and the names of the old gods were once again carved into stone, louder and more proudly than ever before. Tutankhamun issued a decree, known today as the Restoration Stela, that described the land's sorry state and his divine mission to fix it. It reads, "The temples of the gods and goddesses ... had fallen into ruin, their shrines were deserted, the land was in distress. The gods had turned their backs on this land." Then it declared that the new king had made everything right again, filling the temples with gold, silver, and servants. In the eyes of the people, the balance was restored. The boy king, in his name, had healed Egypt. For 10 years, Tutankhamun reigned. We imagine pharaohs as mighty conquerors leading armies, or as grand builders commissioning colossal monuments. Tutankhamun was neither. His reign was one of quiet consolidation, not dramatic expansion. The real work of governing was likely handled by his advisors, Horeme Bandai. They stabilized the economy, shored up the borders, and methodically erased the final traces of Akhenaten's heresy. They even started the process of dismantling the city of Akhenaten, using its stone blocks as filler for new constructions in Thebes. While he may not have been a decision-maker, Tutankhamun was the public face of this new era of peace and prosperity. He was depicted in the traditional pharaonic style, shown worshipping the old gods, making offerings, and upholding the divine order. Art from his time shows a vibrant and luxurious court life. We see images of him with his wife, Akhenaten, in scenes of domestic affection, a tender style inherited from the Amarna period. We also see him as the active pharaoh, riding a chariot, hunting ostriches, or symbolically smiting Egypt's enemies. These images were propaganda, of course, designed to project an image of a strong, capable king, regardless of the reality. He was the calming presence that allowed the kingdom to stitch itself back together. And then, just as he was entering manhood, he was gone. At only 19 years old, Tutankhamun died. How did he die? For decades, this has been one of history's greatest mysteries. Was it murder? A blow to the head? For a long time, a dark spot on the back of his skull, seen in early X-rays, fueled the theory that he was assassinated, perhaps by one of his ambitious advisors who wanted the throne. It's a tantalizing story, but modern science tells a different one. Using CT scans, researchers have been able to create a detailed 3D image of his mummy. These scans revealed that the hole in his skull was likely made during the mummification process. They did, however, find something else, a severe compound fracture in his left leg, which happened shortly before his death. It's possible he fell from a chariot during a hunt. In a world without antibiotics, such an injury could easily have become infected and led to his death. Furthermore, DNA analysis suggests he was a fragile king. Generations of inbreeding within the royal family, his own parents, were likely brother and sister left him with a host of health problems. He had a clubfoot and bone disease and likely needed a cane to walk. The scans also revealed evidence of multiple bouts of malaria, the most severe strain. A frail young man, weakened by genetic disorders and malaria, suffering a broken leg. It's a far more likely, if less dramatic cause of death than an assassin's blow. He died not in a conspiracy, but from a tragic convergence of poor health and bad luck. His death was sudden and unexpected. The kingdom was thrown into a crisis, and his burial had to be arranged in a hurry. Because his death was so sudden, there was no grand royal tomb ready for him. Pharaohs typically began construction on their tombs the moment they took the throne. Tutankhamun's own tomb was likely still a work in progress, so the court officials did the next best thing. They repurposed a small, non-royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings. It was far too small for a pharaoh, little more than a few rooms and a short corridor. Into this cramped space, they crammed an astonishing amount of treasure, over 5,000 objects. Gilded chariots had to be disassembled to fit through the door. Ornate couches, golden shrines, alabaster jars, chests of jewelry, clothing, weapons, and even a royal board game were all stacked from floor to ceiling. It was a king's worldly possessions, hastily packed away for his journey to the afterlife. It seems that the plan was to later move him to a more fitting tomb, but this never happened. His successor, took the throne, and then the general Horemheb after him. Horemheb was determined to erase not just Akhenaten, but the entire Amun period, including Tutankhamun's monuments. Replacing the boy king's name with his own, Tutankhamun was effectively written out of history. The entrance to his little tomb was soon covered by the debris from the construction of a later tomb, that of Ramesses VI. And then he was forgotten. Sand and rock sealed the entrance. For over 3,000 years, he rested in peace. While the grand tombs of mightier pharaohs, like Ramesses the Great, were looted by tomb robbers time and time again, Tutankhamun's humble resting place remained untouched, a perfect time capsule of the 18th dynasty. For centuries, treasure hunters and archaeologists scoured the Valley of the Kings, convinced it had given up all its secrets. By the early 20th century, most believed the valley was exhausted. But one man refused to give up. A stubborn English archaeologist named Howard Carter. Carter was obsessed with finding a lost pharaoh he'd seen mentioned in a few minor inscriptions, Tutankhamun, for 5 long seasons. Funded by his patron Lord Carnarvon, Carter and his team dug in the desert heat, finding almost nothing. His funding was about to be cut. He had one last chance. On November 4th, 1922, a water boy on his team stumbled on a stone step buried in the sand. Carter was electrified. His team cleared the sand, revealing a full staircase descending into the bedrock. At the bottom was a sealed doorway stamped with the necropolis seals of the jackal god Anubis. Carter knew he was on the brink of a monumental discovery. He sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England, "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations." It took weeks for Carnarvon to arrive. Finally, on November 26th, with his patron and a small group of witnesses beside him, Carter made a tiny breach in the top corner of the doorway. He held up a candle and peered into the darkness. The air inside, hot from 3,000 years of silence, rushed out, extinguishing the flame. He lit it again. For a moment he was speechless as his eyes adjusted to the gloom. Lord Carnarvon, unable to stand the suspense, asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter turned and, with a voice filled with awe, uttered the immortal words, "Yes, wonderful things." What Carter saw was just a glimpse of the antechamber, a room piled high with a dazzling chaos of golden objects. Golden couches carved into the shape of mythical beasts, alabaster vases of intricate design, disassembled chariots gleaming with gold leaf, and two life-sized black and gold statues of the king standing guard, and beyond that, another sealed door. It took months of painstaking work to catalogue and clear that first room. Finally, they reached the sealed doorway to the burial chamber. When they opened it, they were met with a wall of solid gold. It was the side of a massive gilded shrine, so large it almost filled the entire room. It was like a set of Russian nesting dolls. Inside that first shrine was a second, then a third, and a fourth. Within the final shrine lay the sarcophagus, a massive block of carved quartzite. When the heavy lid was lifted, it revealed not one, but 3 coffins, nested one inside the other. The first 2 were made of wood covered in gold, but the final, innermost coffin left them breathless. It was crafted from over 110 kilograms, nearly 250 pounds of solid gold, and inside that coffin lay the mummy of the boy king himself, his face covered by the single most iconic object from all of ancient Egypt, the golden death mask, that serene, youthful face, inlaid with lapis lazuli and other precious stones, stared up at them from across 3 millennia. The discovery became a global sensation. Tut mania swept the world. For the first time, people weren't just looking at an empty tomb or scattered artifacts. They were looking at the complete, untouched burial of an Egyptian pharaoh, a direct window into the unimaginable wealth and ritual of the ancient world. So why does this one pharaoh, a minor king who ruled for a short time and made few decisions on his own, captivate us so completely? It's not because of what he did in life, but because of what he represents in death. He is the face of ancient Egypt. His treasures have toured the world, seen by millions. His golden mask is as recognizable as the Mona Lisa. But more than that, his story is a perfect paradox. He was born to a father who tried to erase 1,000 years of tradition. Tutankhamun's role was to bury that revolution and restore the old ways. But in the end, the new order that he helped usher in tried to erase him in turn. They almost succeeded. For 3,200 years,